And we're back. I just couldn't finish this last slide in that time. Too bad. But here we go. So we talked about then another driver of cost advantage was this ability to utilize capacity efficiently, which is very important, that the ratio of fixed cost to variable cost, especially when it's high, it's important to be able to have high capacity utilization. And then as well, if the costs of installing and closing capacity are reasonable, then we can get a cost advantage. The last issue we'll talk about is just this one of managerial or organizational efficiency, and we can measure this as organizational slack. That is basically, how lazy or complacent or, not facing pressure, pressure to perform well, the managers or the workers are. If we're overpaying, for example, wages, we might be able to, like Southwest Airlines, they reduce their wages, but they're able to maintain a high performance. So this issue of organizational slack, if we can reduce organizational slack, put pressure on people to perform, not let them be complacent or lazy, and get the most out of them. Obviously we need to worry about things like burnout, or making sure that people are not, um, we're not turning over, because high turnover actually works against learning, right? If we have too high, if we're pushing people too hard, or we're not paying them wages that are high enough, we might have high turnover, and that actually will go against the economies of learning. So you have to strike a balance, but it's still, we should try to minimize the organizational slack. So I told you we would talk a little bit more about the experience curve. The experience curve says that as cumulative output doubles, we have some measurable reduction in the unit cost. And this is a real thing. This experience curve exists. These reductions in cost can be, 10, 15, 20%. That is, the idea is that as you produce more and more and more, you gain experience. This was something that the Boston Consulting Group, BCG, they they found in their by doing their consulting, they published an article in 1968 talking. It was called something like Perspectives on Experience, and this led to this so-called law of experience. It just says that as the cumulative output doubles, the unit costs of the value added to a standard product, it declines by a constant percentage. Something can be as high even as 20 to 30%. So this cost is not just based on economies of scale, like the ability to buy, cheaper products, but it's about learning, really. It's about the experience of the workers, of the managers, even all the people in the organization. It's basically saying, you're about the efficiency, the workers, they become physically more dexterous. Remember that word dexterity. They become mentally more confident. They spend less time hesitating, learning, experimenting. They don't make as many mistakes. So over time, they learn shortcuts and how to improve. And this applies to everyone, not just those directly involved in production. It also includes not just the labor efficiency, but the approach used to standardize, to specialize, the improvements in processes and using, more efficient inputs and products and parts and standardization, um, you know, technology, using automated production and information technology, better using equipment, um, fully using the capacity and, making sure that we're using everything to its maximum efficiency. Not changing over. We're trying to, figure out how to streamline, maybe designing the products to be more automation friendly. So all these things go into this so-called experience curve. So the law of experience, again, sorry, I should have put this on, is that the unit cost added to a product declines by constant percent each time the cumulative output doubles. Okay? So again, it's not just about the input costs, but it's the value added costs, the costs that we're adding beyond the product cost itself. And you can see like here, oops, sorry. As the, for example, a 10% experience curve, you look at the top curve, 1 million, 2 million, 4 million, so that's the cumulative volume. As it doubles, a 10% reduction in cost starting at $1. After 4 million units, the cost is only 73 cents, right? That's with a 10% experience curve. With a 20% experience curve starting at $1, after 4 million units, the cost almost halves, right? It gets down almost to 50%. At a 30% experience curve, remember that it's reducing it by 30% after each doubling of cumulative output. So at 30%, after 1 million units, it's 70 cents. After 2 million units, it's already below 50. After 4 million units, we're at 34 cents. That's, huge reduction in the original cost, right? So you see the impact of experience and how important it is. This is why the Boston Consulting Group, after studying this and learning about this experience curve, they made, one of their primary strategies was this idea of getting big, getting large. It's like a really important, super important thing to get as big as possible. Here's some examples of real experience curves. This is the Japanese clocks and watches from 1962 to 72, a 10-year time period. And you can see as the cumulative production increased, the cost per unit went down, dramatically. So it's a 75% slope or a 25% experience curve. And again, with the UK refrigerators, these are real, this is real data. And, Amazon, if you know that, they're obviously the largest online retail firm. It was Jeff Bezos's main strategy. He said, our strategy is to get big fast. And his whole point was to try to capitalize on this experience curve. And it leaves competitors behind. So the farther along you are on the experience curve, the more profitable you're going to be according to your competitors. So if all firms in an industry have the same experience curve, and typically that might be the case, they're all in this same boat basically, but if they all have the same experience curve, then the relative costs are a function of relative market share, because the firm that's farthest along this experience curve, that has the highest production volume, sorry, which is illustrated in the market share, right? So the firms that have the highest market share are also going to have the lowest relative costs. Again, if all firms in the industry have the same experience curve. So again, it's really important to have, to be able to exploit this experience curve to get large volume fast is important. But just some notes that, association does not imply causation, right? We're not saying that the high market share caused the lowest costs, or that they're related. We can say they're correlated, but it doesn't necessarily imply causation. And we can also have to note that acquiring market share tends to offset the returns to market share. That is, if I want to get large market share, typically it means I might have to reduce my price. So it's kind of like a very difficult balance. It doesn't mean that it's really easy to get, gosh, sorry, it doesn't mean that it's really easy to get high market share, because remember that even Amazon was not profitable for the first 10 years. So in order to get that high volume, it means that they had to reinvest to lower their prices, to not, because if they wanted to make a profit early on, it would have prevented them from getting large. So this is important to think about as well, that, trying to get high market share tends to offset the profits in the beginning, especially. And then the final word on experience is this that follows. When a person with experience meets a person with money, the person with experience gains money, and the person with money gains experience. And that's maybe you know this person, Anonymous. He's very famous. So when a person with experience meets a person with money, the person with experience gains money, and the person with money gains experience. And this is a true story, bro. Okay, so now let's talk about applying the value chain to cost analysis. And we'll look at the case of the automobile manufacturing industry. Okay, so here's a generic value chain. This is the McKinsey generic value chain, if you remember. And it looks something like this. So what we can do is determine the major sources of total cost. So we break down the value chain into its components, and then we try to figure out where are the major sources of cost. And in this situation, we can say, well, purchasing, R&D, remember R&D, coming up with a new car design, the manufacturing and assembly, and the sales and marketing. These are the major contributors to the total cost. Then after we've identified them, we say, okay, well, what are the drivers within these value chain activities? What are the main drivers of cost? So, for example, in purchasing, the main driver is things like the size of the order, right? If we're going to get quantity discounts, we have to make large orders. The location of suppliers. Maybe Chinese suppliers might give us lower costs, for example. The R&D, right? The size of the R&D commitment, the productivity of our R&D efforts, the number and frequency of the new models that we're trying to come up with, and then of course the sales per model. So we can divide the costs of R&D over the number of units sold. Assembly, right, the scale of the plants, the number of models per plant, the degree of automation is going to contribute. Remember, we talked about the drivers of cost, like how automated it is. How much we're paying people is going to be a huge contributor. The location of plants, right, if we're going to assemble in a high cost region versus a low cost region. And then for sales and marketing, the size of the advertising budget, the brand equity, the strength of the existing reputation, the sales volume. So these are the major cost drivers. And then we identify the linkages between these. So, for example, if we have large purchasing, that means we're going to have inventory holding costs, right? So there's a trade-off between these two. If we're doing really good in purchasing, we're purchasing very high quality components, then our quality testing costs may go down. If we're doing really good quality testing, then our costs in distribution, we may not have high returns, right? So we'll lower our return costs. So I say all these things here, and again, I'm running out of time. But I'll put all these. You can see these in detail on your own time. Just look and read through them. Okay. So we're running out of time here, and then finally we'll make recommendations for cost reduction based on all these implications. So look at these on your own time, and then we'll come back and I'll finish up.